The sound of papers shuffling across the polished mahogany desk seemed unnaturally loud in the silence of Daniel Peterson's office. I watched his hands, steady, manicured, adorned with the gold signet ring that marked 30 years at Peterson, Williams and Associates, as they arranged the documents that would finalize the greatest betrayal of my life. "As you can see, Ms. Taylor, the will is quite clear," Daniel said, his voice carrying that practiced professional detachment that lawyers perfect over decades. "Your father's estate, including Taylor Construction, the family home, and investment, portfolios totaling approximately $3 million, has been bequeathed in its entirety to your sister, Rebecca." Across the table, Rebecca sat perfectly poised in her tailored navy suit, not a strand of her highlighted blonde hair out of place. The slight upturn at the corner of her mouth wasn't quite a smile. She was too careful for that. But the triumph in her eyes was unmistakable. Beside her, her husband Jason stared fixedly at his polished shoes, apparently finding something fascinating about the Italian leather. "That's impossible," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Dad always intended to split everything equally between us. He told me so countless times, even from his hospital bed 2 months ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Daniel cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I understand this is difficult, Emma, but the will was executed properly with witnesses while you were—" He hesitated, searching for the delicate phrasing. "While you were indisposed." Indisposed. The clinical term for being in a medically induced coma after a head-on collision that shattered my left leg and collapsed my lung. The accident that happened, coincidentally, just 3 days after my father suffered his fatal heart attack. The convenient timing that kept me trapped in Mercy General Hospital, breathing through tubes, while Rebecca apparently convinced our grief-stricken father to change his will on his deathbed. "May I see it?" I asked, extending my hand. My arm still bore the fading bruises from IV lines, a visible reminder of what I'd endured while my sister had been busy securing her future. Daniel passed me the document. It looked official enough, legal. Language, notary stamps, witness signatures. My father's signature at the bottom, shaky but recognizable. Dated just 2 days after my accident, 1 day before his death. "I'm sorry, Emma," Rebecca said, her voice a masterpiece of practiced sympathy. "Dad was concerned about the company. You've been away for so long, working on your own architectural firm. I've been helping him run Taylor Construction for the past 5 years. He just wanted to ensure a smooth transition." I looked up from the will to meet her eyes. The sister I'd shared a bedroom with for 16 years. The sister whose college tuition I'd helped pay when Dad's business hit a rough patch. The sister who had apparently been waiting for the perfect opportunity to take everything. "A smooth transition," I repeated. How thoughtful. Daniel shuffled. More papers, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. "There are a few personal items your father specifically wanted you to have. Your mother's jewelry collection, her art pieces, and the lake cabin in Pine Ridge." The cabin. A small 2-bedroom structure that hadn't been renovated since the 1990s, worth perhaps 1% of the total estate. The final insult. "Well," I said, carefully refolding the will and placing it on the desk. "It seems everything is in order then." Rebecca's shoulders relaxed slightly. She'd been expecting a fight, screaming, threats of lawsuits, the emotional outburst of a wronged sibling. Instead, I gathered my cane from where it rested against the chair, another souvenir from my accident, and rose carefully to my feet. "Emma?" Daniel called as I reached the door. "For what it's worth, I advised your father against this distribution. I suggested a more equitable arrangement." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. "But you still drew up the paperwork." He had the decency to look ashamed. It's my job to execute my client's wishes. regardless of my personal opinions. "Yes," I said. "We all make choices, don't we?" Outside, the early autumn air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and turning leaves. I leaned more heavily on my cane than I would have liked, the exertion of holding myself together making my injured leg throb with renewed intensity. My rehabilitation therapist would be displeased. She'd warned me against emotional strain during recovery. I slid into the back seat of my waiting Uber, giving the driver my address in the Arts District, where my sleek apartment waited. Purchased with my own money, from my own successful career. As the car pulled away from Peterson, Williams & Associates, I didn't look back at the building where my family legacy had just been stolen from me. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd been reluctant to call until now. "Olivia Rodriguez," answered a crisp, professional voice. "Ms. Rodriguez, this is Emma Taylor. We need to meet. Today, if possible." "I've been expecting your call," she replied. "The summit? 1 hour? I'll be there." I ended the call, watching the familiar streets of Oak Ridge slide past my window. The city where the Taylor name had meant something for 3 generations. My grandfather had started with a single truck and a toolbox, building homes for returning veterans after World War II. My father had expanded into commercial construction, securing the contracts that transformed Oak Ridge's skyline over the past 30 years. And now it all belonged to Rebecca, who had never lifted a hammer in her life. But what my sister didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that I had been suspicious long before today's meeting. The lake cabin she thought was such a worthless consolation prize held secrets she couldn't begin to imagine. And I had spent my 6 weeks in hospital planning for exactly this moment. By the time my Uber reached the summit, Oak Ridge's most discreet restaurant for those conversations best had away from prying eyes. The pain in my leg had subsided to a dull ache. I checked my reflection in my compact mirror, still pale from my hospital stay. Dark circles under my eyes not fully concealed by makeup, but presentable, professional, composed. Olivia was already waiting in a corner booth, a glass of sparkling water with lime in front of her. At 45, she had the sharp, observant eyes of someone who had spent decades uncovering people's secrets. Her close-cropped salt and pepper hair and simple charcoal pantsuit gave her an unassuming appearance, exactly what a good private investigator needed. "You look better than when I visited you in the hospital," she said as I slid into the booth. Across from her. "Amazing what learning you've been disinherited will do for your motivation," I replied dryly. The waiter appeared, and I ordered an espresso. Only when he had retreated did Olivia pull a slim file folder from her leather briefcase. "So they went through with it," she said. "The new will." "You sound unsurprised." "After what I found, very little would surprise me about your sister and brother-in-law." She tapped the folder with one manicured nail. "The question is, what do you want to do about it?" I took a deep breath. "Tell me everything you found. Start from the beginning." Olivia opened the folder, revealing neat stacks of documents, photographs, and transcripts. "Rebecca and Jason Reed have been systematically siphoning funds from Taylor Construction for approximately 3 years," she began. "Small amounts at first, disguised as consulting fees to shell companies they control. After your mother died? Last year, the amounts increased significantly. My mother's death from breast cancer had devastated our family. While I had postponed several major projects at my architectural firm to help care for her in her final months, Rebecca had been notably absent, always citing work commitments at Taylor Construction. They needed the money to maintain appearances," Olivia continued. "The house in Lakeview Estates, the matching Range Rovers, the country club membership. They've been living well beyond their legitimate means. Jason's real estate development company has been failing for years, despite what they project publicly." The waiter delivered my espresso, and I took a sip of the bitter liquid, welcoming the jolt of clarity it provided. But the theft from the company was just the beginning, Olivia said, her voice lowering. 3 months ago, they began accessing your father's medical records through a nurse they were bribing at Oak Ridge Memorial. They received updates on his cardiac condition, specifically the risk factors for a major cardiac event. My cup froze, halfway to my lips. Are you suggesting they knew my father would have a heart attack? I'm suggesting they were monitoring his health very closely, waiting for a vulnerability. When his cardiologist recommended a change in medication that might temporarily increase his risk while his body adjusted, they became very attentive. The implication hung in the air between us. I set down my cup carefully, afraid I might shatter it in my grip. And my accident? The timing was remarkably convenient. Olivia met my eyes directly. Your brake lines had been tampered with, Emma. The police report ruled it mechanical failure, but I had an independent mechanic examine the evidence photos. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Someone with basic knowledge of automobiles could have caused that specific failure. The world seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. I had suspected Rebecca's manipulation of our father's will while I was hospitalized. I had even considered that she might have been stealing from the company. But sabotaging my car? Potentially causing an accident that had nearly killed me? Do you have proof? Something that would stand up legally? Olivia nodded. The mechanic's report for one. But more importantly, there's the matter of the nurse who was feeding them your father's medical information. She's agreed to testify, in exchange for immunity. She also witnessed something interesting the day your father allegedly signed the new will. What? Your father was on heavy painkillers following a cardiac procedure. According to her statement, he was barely conscious, certainly not of sound mind to be executing legal documents. She observed Rebecca guiding his hand to sign the papers. A cold, clarifying anger washed through me, settling into something harder than mere rage. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice. There's something else you should know? Olivia said, sliding a photograph across the table. It showed Rebecca and Jason meeting with someone in a coffee shop. The third person's face was clearly visible, and recognition hit me like a physical blow. That's Daniel Peterson, I said, our family lawyer. Taken 2 weeks before your accident, Olivia confirmed. They met 3 times in locations far from both their offices. Very unusual for a lawyer and client who could easily meet in professional settings. He's involved, I murmured. He helped them plan this. It appears so, though I suspect his involvement was more passive, looking the other way, failing to verify your father's competence, perhaps backdating documents. From what I've observed, Daniel Peterson is weak rather than malicious. I stared at the photo, remembering Daniel's discomfort in his office earlier, his assertion that he had advised my father against the unequal distribution. More lies, it seemed. What do you want to do with all this, Emma? Olivia asked quietly. We have enough to go to the police regarding the tampering with your car. The financial fraud at Taylor Construction is clear-cut. The will could be contested on grounds that your father wasn't competent when he signed it. I considered her words carefully. Each option she presented was valid. Each would likely succeed. But something felt incomplete about those paths. Too straightforward, too public, too messy. After what Rebecca and Jason had done, not just stealing my inheritance but nearly killing me in the process, they deserved something more. Precise. There's one more option, I said slowly. But first, I need to retrieve something from the cabin at Pine Ridge. Olivia raised an eyebrow. The lakeside property you inherited? Yes. My mother kept a safe there, built into the stone fireplace. Rebecca doesn't know about it. No one does, except me. And what's in this safe? I allowed myself a small smile. Insurance. The kind my mother believed in keeping, just in case. 2 days later, I stood in the musty living room of the lake cabin, inhaling the familiar scent of pine and old books that had permeated the small building for as long as I could remember. This place, dismissed by Rebecca as worthless, had been my mother's sanctuary, her retreat from the social obligations that came with being Margaret Taylor, wife of Oak Ridge's prominent builder. Here, she had taught me to fish, to build a fire, to identify constellations in the unpolluted night sky. And here, during one of our last visits before her cancer diagnosis, she had shown me the safe and given me the combination. "There are things about our family you should know, Emma," she had said. "Things I've protected you from. But if anything happens to me, you'll need to be prepared." At the time, I'd assumed she was being dramatic, perhaps even a bit paranoid. Now I understood she had been prescient. I knelt awkwardly before the stone fireplace, my injured leg protesting the position. Behind a loose stone at the base, the safe's dial gleamed dully in the afternoon light. I carefully entered the combination. My mother's birthday, followed by mine, and heard the satisfying click of the mechanism disengaging. Inside were several sealed envelopes, a USB drive, and a leather-bound journal with my mother's elegant handwriting filling its pages. The top envelope bore a simple label in her script, "In case of emergency." I opened it first, unfolding several pages of detailed instructions. As I read, my mother's voice seemed to fill the cabin around me, strategic and clear-eyed even from beyond the grave. When I finished reading, I gathered everything from the safe and carefully locked it again. Outside, Olivia waited in her car, engine idling. "Did you find what you needed?" she asked as I slid into the passenger seat. "Everything and more," I confirmed. "We need to make one more stop before we head back to Oak Ridge." "Where to?" "First National Bank. There's another safe deposit box we need to access." The pieces were falling into place now, the strategy crystallizing. Rebecca thought she had won, thought she had secured everything of value in our father's estate. She had no idea what was coming. 1 week later, I was back in Daniel Peterson's office, this time without an appointment. His secretary tried to stop me, but I walked past her with purpose, ignoring her protests. My physical therapist would be pleased. I barely needed the cane anymore, strength returning to my injured leg with each passing day. Daniel looked up from his desk, startled by my unannounced entrance. "Emma," he said, quickly composing his features. "I didn't know we had a meeting scheduled." "We don't," I replied, taking the seat across from him without being invited. "But I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." He shifted uncomfortably, straightening papers on his desk. "If this is about your father's will, I understand your disappointment, but legally—" "This isn't about that will," I interrupted. "It's about the real one." His hand froze mid-motion. "I don't understand." I reached into my bag and withdrew a sealed envelope, placing it carefully on his desk. "This is a copy of my father's actual last will and testament, properly executed and notarized 6 months ago. The original is in a secure location." Daniel stared at the envelope but didn't reach for it. "That's impossible. The will we executed was a fraud," I finished for him. "Signed when my father was heavily sedated, guided by Rebecca's hand according to witnesses. I have sworn statements from the medical staff who were present." A fine sheen of sweat had appeared on Daniel's forehead. "Emma, these are serious allegations." "They're not allegations, Daniel. They're facts. Facts I'm prepared to present not only to the probate court, but to the Bar Association's Ethics Committee." The blood drained from his face. "The Ethics Committee?" "Yes, they would be particularly interested in these." I placed a set of photographs on his desk, the same ones Olivia had shown me, of Daniel meeting secretly with Rebecca and Jason. 3 clandestine meetings to plan the fraudulent transfer of a $3 million estate. That's the kind of thing that ends legal careers, doesn't it? He swallowed hard, his professional composure crumbling. I never intended. They said your father had changed his mind, wanted to keep the company intact under Rebecca's management. They convinced me it was what William wanted. And you believed them despite 30 years of knowing my father? Despite drawing up his previous will just 6 months earlier, where he split everything equally between Rebecca and me? Daniel's shoulders slumped. What do you want from me, Emma? The truth, for starters. Then your help in setting things right. Setting things right? How? I smiled thinly. By calling a meeting. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., you, me, Rebecca, and Jason. Tell them it's urgent, related to some regulatory issue with Taylor Construction that requires immediate attention. And if I refuse, then by noon tomorrow, the district attorney, the probate, court, and the Bar Association will all receive copies of everything I've gathered. Your reputation, your career, your freedom, all gone. I leaned forward, my voice dropping. Or you can help me, and perhaps salvage something from this mess you've helped create. After a long moment, Daniel nodded, defeat written in every line of his face. I'll arrange the meeting. As I stood to leave, he looked up at me, something like wonder crossing his features. You're more like your mother than I realized. I paused at the door. Everyone always said I took after my father, but you're right. This was all Mom's contingency plan. She knew what Rebecca was capable of long before anyone else did. Besides, next morning, I arrived at Daniel's office 15 minutes early, bringing Olivia with me as both witness and support. His secretary, clearly briefed on the situation, escorted us immediately to the conference room where Daniel waited, looking as though he hadn't slept. They're on their way up, he said tightly. I haven't told them you'll be here. Good, I replied, taking a seat at the head of the table. My father's position during countless business meetings in this very room. Moments later, the door opened and Rebecca and Jason entered, both freezing mid-step when they saw me. What is she doing here? Rebecca demanded, turning to Daniel. You said this was about regulatory issues. It is, in a manner of speaking, Daniel replied, gesturing for them to sit. Please take a seat. This concerns all of you. Reluctantly, they sat, Rebecca's eyes never leaving my face, suspicion etched in every line of her body. I'll keep this brief, I said, my voice steady. I know everything. The embezzlement from Taylor Construction, the monitoring of Dad's medical condition, the tampering with my car, the fraudulent will. Jason's face went ashen. Rebecca's composure slipped for just a moment before she recovered, forcing a laugh. That's absurd, she said. You're clearly still affected by your medication, Emma. Or perhaps the head injury was worse than we thought. I have proof of all of it, I continued as if she hadn't spoken. Financial records, witness statements from the nurse you bribed and the hospital staff present when Dad signed your fake will. A forensic mechanics report on my brake lines. I slid copies of each document across the table as I listed them. Jason reached for one, but Rebecca slapped his hand away. This is a pathetic attempt to contest a valid will because you're jealous, she snapped. No court will take this seriously. That's where you're wrong, Olivia interjected, speaking for the first time. The evidence is solid. The prosecutor? I consulted estimates embezzlement charges alone would carry 7 to 10 years. Add attempted murder and fraud. We're looking at decades. Attempted murder? Jason echoed weakly. We never... Shut up, Jason, Rebecca hissed. I leaned forward, meeting my sister's gaze directly. Here's what's going to happen. Daniel has the real will, the one Dad signed 6 months ago when he was of sound mind and body. It splits everything equally between us, as he always intended. You're going to agree to honor it without contest. And why would I do that? Rebecca challenged, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. Because the alternative is prison, I said simply. For both of you. Everything I've mentioned goes to the police, the DA, and the press. The Taylor name you've been so desperate to control will be synonymous with fraud and attempted murder. Your comfortable life will be over. A heavy silence fell over the room. Jason looked on the verge of physical illness. Rebecca's breathing had quickened, her carefully maintained facade beginning to crack. "You're bluffing," she said finally, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "You wouldn't destroy the family name just to get revenge." "It's not about revenge," I corrected her. "It's about justice, about honoring what Dad actually wanted, about consequences for actions." I paused. "And you're wrong. I absolutely would follow through. The real question is, are you willing to risk everything to find out?" Rebecca and Jason exchanged a look, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Rebecca turned back to me. "What exactly are you proposing?" "The estate divided, as per the original will. You return every penny you embezzled from the company. We establish a proper board of directors for Taylor Construction, with both of us having equal say, but neither having unilateral control. And in return, this evidence never sees the light of day. You avoid prison, maintain your social standing, keep half of what you tried to steal completely." Daniel cleared his throat. "As your legal counsel, both of your counsel, I strongly advise accepting these terms. They are extraordinarily generous under the circumstances." Rebecca's eyes narrowed as she studied my face, perhaps trying to discern if I was serious, if I would really follow through on my threats. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because after a long moment she gave a curt nod. "Fine. Draw up the papers." As Daniel began outlining the next steps, the legal processes required to invalidate the fraudulent will and reinstate the legitimate one, I observed my sister. The sister I had shared a childhood with, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose homework I had helped with. The sister who had ordered a nurse to manipulate our dying father's hand to sign away my inheritance. The sister who had quite possibly arranged for my near-fatal accident. I felt no satisfaction in her defeat, no joy in her humiliation. Only a profound sadness for what might have been, and a quiet resolve to rebuild what she had nearly destroyed. Later, as Olivia and I left the building, she asked, "Do you think they'll honor the agreement?" "They don't have a choice," I replied. "Rebecca values her freedom and social position above all else, and I made copies of everything in Mom's safe. If they try anything again, the consequences will be immediate and irreversible." Olivia nodded approvingly. "Your mother would be proud. She prepared you well." I thought of the journal I'd found in the safe, filled with my mother's observations and contingency plans, how she had documented Rebecca's troubling behaviors. Over the years, the small cruelties and manipulations that had grown more concerning as they reached adulthood. How she had quietly gathered evidence, created backups, established the very safeguards that had saved me. "Yes," I agreed softly. "She did." 3 months later, I stood on the construction site of Taylor Architectural's new headquarters, the first major project of the newly restructured company that now combined my architectural expertise with my father's construction legacy. The autumn air was crisp, leaves turning gold and crimson around the partially completed building. My phone buzzed with a message from Michael Chen, my former colleague who had been instrumental in helping me analyze the financial records Olivia had uncovered. Board meeting confirmed for Thursday. Both R&J will be there. How are you feeling about it? I typed back, "Ready? The restructuring plan is solid. Even Rebecca won't be able to argue with the projected growth." The truth was, working alongside my sister in this new arrangement was far from comfortable. The trust between us was irreparably broken. But we had established a professional detente, bound by the legal agreements that protected both of us, and by the evidence that remained, locked away, insurance against any future betrayal. As I surveyed the rising framework of the building, I thought about what my father would make of all this. The company he had built was evolving, becoming something new while honoring its foundations. The fortune he had amassed was being utilized, as he had intended, split between his daughters despite one's attempt to claim it all. And me? I was standing on my own 2 feet again, literally and figuratively. The injuries from my accident had healed, leaving only the faintest limp in cold weather. The deeper wounds, the betrayal, the loss of the sister I thought I knew, those would take longer. They might never heal completely. But I had survived. I had uncovered the truth. I had reclaimed my inheritance, not just the money and the company, but my mother's strength, my father's determination, and my own sense of justice. As I turned to leave the construction site, my phone rang again. Daniel Peterson's name flashed on the screen. Since the confrontation in his office, he had worked diligently to make amends, perhaps hoping to salvage something of his professional integrity. "Emma," he said when I answered, "I've just filed the final paperwork with the probate court. It's official now. Everything is as your father originally intended." "Thank you, Daniel. I want you to know how deeply I regret my role in all this. I should have been more vigilant, should have questioned Rebecca's claims about your father's wishes." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have. But you're making it right now. That counts for something." After we disconnected, I stood for a moment watching the construction workers assembling the framework that would eventually support the entire structure. Each beam and joint was critical. If one failed, the integrity of the whole building would be compromised. Families were like that too, I reflected. The Taylor family had fractured, critical support beams severed by greed and betrayal. But something new was being built from the foundation that remained. Something perhaps stronger and more honest than what had existed before. The inheritance my sister had tried to steal from me while I lay in a hospital bed was restored. But the real legacy? The understanding of both human weakness and strength? The knowledge of how to protect what matters? The ability to seek justice rather than mere revenge? That was the true inheritance my parents had left me. And that was something Rebecca could never take away. The meeting with Rebecca, Jason, and Daniel had gone exactly as I'd planned, but I took no pleasure in their shocked faces or stammered excuses. As I drove away from Peterson, Williams, and Associates, my thoughts drifted back to the days following my father's funeral, a ceremony I'd attended in a wheelchair, still weak from my accident, with bandages visible beneath my black dress. Rebecca had been the picture of sorrowful dignity that day, accepting condolences with teary eyes, her hand never leaving Jason's arm. She had even arranged for me to sit in the front row, a gesture of apparent kindness that now seemed calculated to showcase her generosity toward her injured sister. The performance had been flawless, just like everything Rebecca did. My cell phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Michael Chen's name flashed on the screen. My former colleague had been invaluable during my investigation, using his financial expertise to decode the complex web of transactions Rebecca and Jason had used to siphon money from Taylor Construction. "How did it go?" he asked when I answered. "They caved," I replied, turning onto Main Street. "Completely and utterly." "I wish I could have seen their faces," Michael said, the smile evident in his voice. "Especially that weasel Jason." "It wasn't pretty," I admitted, "but it's done. Daniel's drawing up the paperwork now to invalidate the fraudulent will and reinstate Dad's original one." "And the company?" "Equal control between Rebecca and me, with a board of directors to prevent either of us from making unilateral decisions." I paused at a red light, watching pedestrians cross in front of my car. "I'll need your help setting up the financial oversight systems." "Consider it done," Michael said without hesitation. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. at Taylor Construction." "Headquarters." I think it's time I reacquainted myself with the family business. After ending the call, I changed direction, heading not toward my apartment in the Arts District, but to the sprawling Tudor-style house in Oak Ridge Heights, where I'd grown up. I hadn't been back since before my accident, before my father's death, before everything changed. The house looked exactly as I remembered. The meticulously maintained lawn, the climbing roses my mother had planted along the eastern wall, the stone pathway leading to the massive oak front door. For 40 years, this had been the center of the Taylor universe, the place where business deals were sealed over dinner and family celebrations marked the passing seasons. Now it stood empty, its fate part of the contested inheritance. Under my father's original will, Rebecca and I would decide together whether to sell it or maintain it for family use. Under her fraudulent version, she would have had sole discretion. I used my old key to enter, the familiar scent of lemon furniture, polish and old books washing over me as I stepped inside. The foyer's walnut paneling gleamed in the afternoon light, filtering through stained glass sidelights. To my right, the formal living room where my mother had hosted countless charity committee meetings. To my left, the study where my father had taught me to read blueprints when I was barely tall enough to reach his desk. I made my way to that study now, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. The door was ajar, and I pushed it open to find the room largely unchanged. Leather-bound books lining the walls, the antique globe in the corner, my father's massive oak desk dominating the space. The only difference was the thin layer of dust, covering everything. Rebecca evidently hadn't spent much time here since claiming her inheritance. Taking a seat in my father's chair, I ran my fingers along the worn edges of the desk blotter, remembering the countless hours I'd spent watching him work. William Taylor had been demanding, often stern, but never unfair. He had expected excellence from both his daughters, had celebrated our achievements equally, had never once suggested that Rebecca deserved more of his legacy than I did. I opened the center drawer, smiling faintly at its familiar contents. Fountain, pens arranged by color, paper clips in a small crystal dish. The lucky silver dollar his father had given him when he started the company. Beneath these items lay a leather-bound notebook I didn't recognize. I withdrew it carefully, opening to the first page. "For Emma," read the inscription in my father's bold handwriting. "When the time comes." My heart thumped painfully against my ribs as I turned to the next page, dated just 3 months before his death. "I've been experiencing concerning symptoms that my doctors say could indicate heart problems. If the worst should happen, there are things you need to know. Things about the company, about our family, and most importantly, about your sister." I read on, my hands trembling slightly as my father's voice seemed to rise from the pages. He had suspected Rebecca and Jason of financial impropriety. He had begun his own quiet investigation, documenting discrepancies in company accounts, unusual withdrawals, vendor contracts with inflated prices where the excess disappeared into untraceable accounts. He had been planning to confront Rebecca, to remove her from the company if necessary, but had wanted irrefutable proof first. He had been protecting me, too, keeping me at arm's length from the investigation in case Rebecca retaliated. "If you're reading this," the final entry stated, "then I didn't finish what I started. The task falls to you now, Emma. You've always been the backbone of this family, even when you didn't realize it. Trust Margaret's preparations. Your mother saw this, coming long before I did. And most importantly, be careful. Rebecca is more dangerous than I ever wanted to believe." Tears blurred my vision as I closed the notebook. My father had known. He had been trying to stop Rebecca. Perhaps that was what had truly triggered his heart attack, the stress of discovering his daughter's betrayal, the strain of gathering evidence against his own child. And now I had another piece of the puzzle, another weapon in my arsenal if Rebecca decided to challenge our agreement. I tucked the notebook into my bag and left the study, moving through the silent house with new purpose. My father and mother had both left me the tools I needed to fight this battle. I would not let them down. The following morning, I arrived at Taylor Construction's headquarters 15 minutes early, allowing myself time to absorb the surroundings before the confrontation to come. The sleek 6-story building in downtown Oak Ridge had been my father's pride, a physical manifestation of how far the company had come from its humble beginnings. The security guard at the front desk did a double take when I entered, obviously, recognizing me but uncertain how to react given the current circumstances. "Good morning, George," I said, remembering his name from my previous visits. "It's been a while." "Ms. Taylor?" he replied, surprise giving way to a genuine smile. "It's good to see you back on your feet. We were all real worried when we heard about your accident." "Thank you. I'm here for a meeting in the main conference room. I believe some other attendees will be arriving shortly." He nodded, handing me a visitor badge. "Mr. and Mrs. Reed are already upstairs. Mr. Peterson arrived about 5 minutes ago." So, Rebecca and Jason had beaten me here, perhaps hoping to establish psychological dominance by claiming the space first. It was a typical Rebecca power play, and one I had anticipated. I took the elevator to the top floor, where the executive offices and main conference room were located. The receptionist's eyes widened when I approached, but she quickly composed herself. "Good morning, Ms. Taylor. The meeting is in the main conference room. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be wonderful, thank you," I replied, appreciating her professionalism despite what must be a deeply confusing situation for the staff. When I entered the conference room, 4 people looked up. Rebecca and Jason on one side of the long mahogany table, Daniel and Michael on the other. Michael had arrived early as well, it seemed, already setting up his laptop and speaking quietly with Daniel about document preparations. "Emma," Rebecca acknowledged stiffly, her smile not reaching her eyes. She wore a tailored burgundy dress. That probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe chignon. Jason nodded without speaking, his usual confidence notably diminished. "Good morning," I replied, taking the seat at the head of the table, my father's old position. No one challenged the choice. For the next 3 hours, we hammered out the details of the new arrangement. Daniel had prepared the documents invalidating the fraudulent will and reinstating the original one. Michael presented a restructuring plan for Taylor Construction that would include a formal board of directors and strict financial oversight measures specifically designed to prevent the kind of embezzlement Rebecca and Jason had perpetrated. Throughout the discussion, Rebecca maintained a facade of cooperative professionalism, though I could sense the fury simmering beneath the surface. Only once did she directly challenge a proposal, when I suggested bringing in an outside forensic accountant to conduct a full audit of the company's books. "That's completely unnecessary," she snapped. "It would disrupt operations and undermine staff confidence." "Actually," Michael interjected smoothly, "it's standard practice during leadership transitions, especially when there have been irregularities in financial management." Rebecca's eyes flashed dangerously. "Are you accusing me of something, Mr. Chen?" "Not at all," I cut in before Michael could respond. "But given the discrepancies we've already identified, an audit is non-negotiable. We can frame it to the staff as part of the transition process following Dad's death." I held her gaze steadily until she looked away, conceding the point without further argument. She knew how precarious her position was, how completely I could destroy her if I chose to. By noon, we had established the framework for moving forward. Rebecca and I would have equal shares in Taylor Construction and shared decision-making authority, mediated by the board. The family home would be maintained jointly for now, with decisions about its future postponed until the company transition was complete. The embezzled funds would be returned to the company in a structured repayment plan that Jason and Rebecca could manage without public bankruptcy. "I believe this covers everything," Daniel said finally, gathering the signed documents. "I'll file these with the probate court today. The will substitution should be processed by the end of the week. As the meeting adjourned, Rebecca lingered, waiting until Daniel and Jason had left the room before approaching me. Michael hovered nearby, obviously concerned about leaving me alone with her. "It's okay, Michael," I assured him. "Give us a minute." When the door closed behind him, Rebecca and I faced each other directly for the first time since the confrontation in Daniel's office. The careful mask she had maintained throughout the meeting slipped, revealing the raw anger beneath. "I hope you're satisfied," she said, her voice low and tightly controlled. "You've completely undermined my position here." "I've restored what rightfully belonged to both of us," I corrected. "The position you undermined was your own, Rebecca, with fraud, theft, and possibly attempted murder." She flinched at the last accusation but didn't deny it. "You always thought you were better than me, didn't you? Daddy's brilliant architect. Daughter, too good for the family business until it was time to swoop in and take control." The bitterness in her voice was startling, a glimpse into resentments I had never fully understood. Had she always seen me this way? Had every childhood competition, every academic achievement, every professional success been tallied in her mind as evidence of some imagined favoritism? "That's not true," I said quietly. "I never wanted to compete with you, Rebecca. I just wanted to find my own path." While I stayed behind, working with Dad day after day, learning the business from the ground up, her perfectly manicured hands clenched at her sides. "Do you have any idea what that was like? Being compared to you constantly? Hearing about brilliant Emma with her fancy degree and her award-winning designs?" "Dad was proud of both of us," I insisted. "He never compared us that way." Rebecca laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Of course he did. Maybe not to your face, but I heard it. For years, I heard it." I studied my sister's face, seeing beyond the anger to something more complicated. A lifetime of perceived slights and imagined competitions. A narrative she had constructed where I was the favored daughter and she the overlooked one. It was a distorted mirror image of the reality I had lived, and I wondered briefly if there was any bridging this gulf of perception. "Whatever you believe," I said finally, "it didn't justify what you did. Not the theft, not the fraudulent will, and certainly not tampering with my car." She held my gaze for a long moment, neither confirming nor denying the accusation. Then she straightened her shoulders, the corporate mask sliding back into place. "We have a company to run," she said coolly. "I suggest we focus on that rather than dwelling on the past." As she turned to leave, I called after her, "Rebecca." She paused at the door but didn't turn around. "I'm not dropping the evidence. If anything happens, anything at all, it goes straight to the authorities. All of it." Her shoulders stiffened, but she nodded once before exiting, leaving me alone in the conference room my father had designed at the head of the table where he had presided over countless meetings. I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that the confrontation was over, satisfaction that justice had been served, but also a profound sadness for the sister I had lost, or perhaps had never truly had. Michael returned a few minutes later, concern evident in his expression. "Everything okay?" "As okay as it can be," I replied, gathering my papers. "We have our work cut out for us." "You know she's going to fight you every step of the way, right? This cooperative facade won't last." I nodded, having harbored no illusions about a genuine reconciliation. Rebecca had been backed into a corner, forced to accept terms that preserved her freedom and social standing, but deeply wounded her pride. She would look for ways to reassert control, to undermine my position within the company, to reclaim what she still believed she deserved. "I'm counting on it," I told Michael. "That's why we need to be one step ahead of her at all times." The next several weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity as I immersed myself in Taylor Construction's operations. The forensic accountants Michael had recommended conducted their audit, uncovering even more financial irregularities than we had initially suspected. Rebecca and Jason had been creative in their embezzlement, using a network of shell companies and inflated vendor contracts to siphon funds for nearly 4 years. I established an office in what had been my father's suite, deliberately leaving his personal items in place while adding my own touch with architectural models and design books. The message to employees was clear. William Taylor's legacy continued, through me, while Rebecca operated from a different office on the same floor, maintaining her existing role in client relations. The staff seemed cautiously optimistic about the new arrangement, particularly when I introduced initiatives my father had postponed. Improved benefits, a profit-sharing plan, and advancement opportunities that Rebecca had reportedly blocked. I made a point of learning everyone's names, from the executive team to the maintenance staff, something my sister had never bothered to do. One afternoon, about a month after the confrontation, I was reviewing blueprints for a new development, when Helen, my father's longtime assistant who now worked for me, announced an unexpected visitor. "Liam Taylor is here to see you," she said, a slight note of surprise in her voice. My heart skipped a beat at the name. Liam was my father's younger brother, though they had rarely spoken in the decade before my father's death. Some family dispute I had never fully understood had created a rift between them, with Liam eventually moving his branch of the Taylor family to Chicago to start his own, smaller construction firm. "Send him in," I said, quickly clearing space on my desk. Liam entered. A moment later, and the resemblance to my father nearly took my breath away. The same tall build, the same salt and pepper hair, the same penetrating blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He was thinner than I remembered, his face more lined, but the family resemblance was unmistakable. "Uncle Liam," I said, coming around the desk to greet him. "This is unexpected." He embraced me briefly, then stepped back to study my face. "You look like your mother," he observed, a hint of sadness in his voice. "I was sorry to hear about William, and about your accident. Seems like the Taylor family has had more than its share of tragedy lately." "Thank you," I replied, gesturing for him to take a seat. "It's been a difficult time." "I imagine so." He settled into the chair across from me, his gaze moving around the office, taking in the subtle changes I'd made to my father's space. "I hear there was some trouble with the will." I hesitated, uncertain how much he knew or how much I should share. The Taylor family had always kept its conflicts private, perhaps too private, allowing resentments to fester unseen. "There were irregularities," I acknowledged carefully. "They've been resolved now." Liam's mouth quirked in a half-smile that reminded me painfully of my father. "That's diplomatic. Word in industry circles is that Rebecca tried to cut you out completely, and you fought back with evidence of financial fraud. Quite the family drama." I winced at the realization that our private battle had become industry gossip. It wasn't how I wanted things to play out. "I'm sure it wasn't," he agreed. "But from what I hear, you handled it well. William would have been proud." The simple statement, delivered without fanfare, affected me more deeply than I expected. Tears pricked at my eyes, and I blinked them back quickly, unwilling to break down in front of this uncle I barely knew. "Why are you here, Uncle Liam?" I asked directly. "After all these years?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I owe you an explanation about the rift between your father and me. It seems relevant now, given what's happened with Rebecca." I waited, sensing that whatever he had come to say was difficult for him. 20 years ago, I discovered financial irregularities in Taylor Construction's books," he began. "Your father and I were equal partners then, though he was always the face of the company. What I found was troubling. Funds being diverted, contracts manipulated, the same kind of things you apparently uncovered with Rebecca." A chill ran through me. "Are you saying my father was embezzling from the company?" Liam shook his head firmly. "No, it was Henry Reed." "Henry Reed?" I repeated, confused for a moment before the connection clicked. Jason's father? Yes. He was our financial controller back then. William trusted him completely. They'd been friends since college. But Henry was gambling heavily, losing more than he could afford. He started small, just like most embezzlers do, but eventually, the amounts grew significant. What happened when you discovered it? I confronted William with the evidence, Liam said, his expression darkening at the memory. He refused to believe it at first, accused me of trying to sabotage his friendship with Henry. When I insisted on bringing in outside auditors, William bought out my share of the company instead, leveraged everything he had to force me out. I struggled to reconcile this story with the father I had known. Fair-minded, meticulous, committed to integrity in all his dealings. That doesn't sound like Dad. It wasn't like him, Liam agreed, but blind spots for the people we care about, those are very human. William couldn't see what Henry was doing because he didn't want to see it. What happened to Henry Reed? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. 6 months after I left, the evidence became too overwhelming to ignore. William finally conducted that audit and discovered even more than I had found. Henry was fired, of course, and could have faced criminal charges, but Dad protected him, I finished. Liam nodded. Made him repay everything over time, kept it quiet to protect the Reed family name and spare them public humiliation. In return, Henry agreed to move to Arizona, start fresh, stay away from the gambling. And Jason? I asked. Where was he during all this? Just graduating college. He knew something had happened, but I doubt William or Henry ever told him the full story. Henry's wife, Jason's mother, certainly knew, though. The repayment plan affected their lifestyle significantly. I sat back, processing this new information. So, Jason learned his financial tricks from his father. And Rebecca learned the art of denial from yours, Liam added gently. William never apologized to me, you know, even after he discovered I'd been right all along. His pride wouldn't allow it. We gradually lost touch, speaking only at major family events until even that stopped. The parallel was painfully clear. My father's blind spot for his friend Henry Reed had fractured his relationship with his brother, just as Rebecca's blind spot for her husband had nearly destroyed her relationship with me. Family patterns repeating, across generations. Why tell me this now? I asked. Liam's expression softened. Because I heard what you did, how you forced accountability, but also showed mercy. You found a better way than either your father or I managed, and because I want to help if you'll let me. Help how? Taylor Construction in Chicago has been doing well, he said. Not on the scale of your operation here, but solid. I'm getting older, thinking about succession planning. My children aren't interested in the business. I thought perhaps we could discuss merging the companies, creating something stronger together. A true family legacy. The offer was unexpected but intriguing. Expanding Taylor Construction beyond Oak Ridge had been one of my father's unfulfilled ambitions. A Chicago presence would open new markets, new opportunities. Rebecca would have to agree, I pointed out. Under our current arrangement, major expansions require consensus. I understand, Liam nodded. But I'm offering this to you, Emma. You would take the lead on the merger. It would be your project. The implication was clear. This was Liam's way of supporting me in the power balance with Rebecca, giving me a significant initiative that would establish my authority within the company more firmly. I'd need to review your financials, I said, professional caution tempering my interest, and discuss it with our board. Of course, he agreed readily. I've brought preliminary documents with me. He patted the briefcase beside his chair. Take your time reviewing them. And Emma, regardless of what you decide about the merger, I hope we can repair the family connection that was lost. Life's too short for these ongoing estrangements. As he spoke, I thought of Rebecca, of the broken trust between us that might never be repaired. I thought of my father, too proud to reconcile with his brother even after discovering his mistake. I thought of my mother, quietly gathering evidence and creating safeguards while maintaining outward family harmony. I'd like that, I told Liam, sincerely. Family connections matter, something I've come to appreciate more deeply lately. After he left, I sat for a long time with the merger documents spread before me, thinking not just about business opportunities, but about family legacies, about patterns broken and continued, about the choices that shape not just our lives, but the generations that follow. Rebecca would fight the merger idea, I knew. She would see it as a threat to her authority, a dilution of her control. But perhaps that conflict, like the others we had weathered and would continue to face, would ultimately strengthen rather than weaken what we were building. A company founded on integrity rather than deception, on collaboration rather than control, on the best of the Taylor legacy rather than its worst. As evening shadows lengthened across my office, I picked up the phone and called Michael. I need your help evaluating a potential merger, I told him, and I'll need a strategy for presenting it to Rebecca. Another battle with your sister? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Not a battle, I corrected. A test for both of us. Whether Rebecca and I could ever truly rebuild the sister relationship that had been shattered by her betrayal remained to be seen. But the choice before me now was clear. Continue the cycle of family estrangement that had separated my father and his brother, or find a new path forward. Looking at the family photo on my desk, taken years ago when my mother was still alive, when Rebecca and I still shared secrets and dreams, when the future seemed uncomplicated, I made my decision. Some inheritances were worth rejecting. Others were worth fighting for. The wisdom lay in knowing the difference. The merger proposal from Uncle Liam sat on my desk for 3 days while I deliberated how best to approach Rebecca. Our fragile professional detente had held through the initial restructuring of Taylor Construction, but introducing such a significant change would test the boundaries we'd established. Still, the opportunity was too valuable to ignore, expanding into the Chicago market could position the company for growth beyond anything my father had achieved. I finally scheduled a private meeting with Rebecca in what had been our father's study at the family home. The neutral territory seemed important, neither her office nor mine, but a space that held meaning for both of us. She arrived precisely, on time, dressed impeccably as always in a charcoal pantsuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. The perfect armor for a business confrontation. This is unusual, she noted, glancing around the study that remained largely untouched since our father's death. I would have thought your office would be more convenient. I wanted privacy, I explained, away from curious employees and interruptions. She took a seat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk, crossing her legs and maintaining the perfect posture our mother had drilled into us since childhood. What's this about, Emma? I have a client meeting in 2 hours. I slid the folder across the desk. Uncle Liam came to see me last week. The slight widening of her eyes was the only indication of surprise. I wasn't aware you maintained contact with him. I didn't. But he reached out after hearing about the changes at Taylor Construction. Rebecca opened the folder, scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. Her expression remained neutral, but I could see the tension in the set of her shoulders, the subtle tightening of her fingers on the paper. A merger, she said finally, with conditions that effectively put you in charge of the entire expansion. It's a significant opportunity, I pointed out. Chicago is a market Dad always wanted to enter, and Liam has established connections there that would take us years to build on our own. And you'd be running it. Her voice was flat, the accusation clear. I'd be overseeing the initial integration, I corrected. The day-to-day operations would remain with Liam's existing team while we establish protocols and systems alignment. She closed the folder with deliberate care. This feels like a power play, Emma. First the restructuring, then the audit, now this. Are you trying to force me out? I met her gaze directly. If I wanted to force you out, Rebecca, I wouldn't have agreed to equal ownership in the first place. I would have pressed charges and watched you and Jason face the consequences of your actions. The reminder hung in the air between us, sharp and unavoidable. Her mouth tightened into a thin line. Then, what is this about? It's about business, I said simply. A smart opportunity that benefits the company. That benefits both of us. Except you get the glory of spearheading the expansion while I what? Sit in Oak Ridge managing the status quo? The bitterness in her voice was palpable and not entirely unfounded. I took a breath, considering how to bridge the divide between us, or at least create a functional working relationship where a true, sisterly bond might be impossible. I thought you might take this approach, I acknowledged. So I have a counter-proposal. You continue overseeing client relations here in Oak Ridge, which has always been your strength. I'll lead the Chicago integration, and together, we'll expand Taylor Construction's design services division, bringing my architectural background and your client network together to create something neither of us could build alone. She studied me, suspicion warring with interest in her expression. Design services would be a joint venture, equal input, equal control. Equal everything, I confirmed. We'd develop it together from the ground up. For a long moment, she said nothing, her gaze dropping to the folder, then rising to scan the study. Our father's books, his awards, the family photos he'd kept, on prominent display. Finally, she sighed, a small concession but a significant one from Rebecca. I'll need to review the financials myself, she said, and speak with the board about implications for our existing projects. Of course. And I want a clear timeline with benchmarks for the design services division, not vague promises about future development. I nodded, relieved that she was engaging with the idea rather than rejecting it outright. I'll draft something this week for your review. She rose, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her immaculate suit. Was there anything else? Just one thing. I hesitated, uncertain whether to raise the subject that had been nagging at me since Liam's visit. Uncle Liam told me about what happened with Jason's father, about the embezzlement 20 years ago. Rebecca went very still, her expression unreadable. What about it? Did you know? About Henry Reed's history with the company? Of course, I knew, she replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her tone. Dad told me when Jason and I got engaged. He wanted me to understand the family history. And it didn't concern you? The pattern? Her eyes flashed. Jason is not his father. No, I agreed quietly. Based on what Liam told me, he's worse. Henry at least had the decency to accept responsibility and make amends. That's unfair, Rebecca snapped. Jason was cooperating fully with the repayment plan until... She stopped abruptly, realizing she'd said too much. Until what, Rebecca? Until you were caught? Until the consequences became real? She gathered her purse, a clear signal that she considered the conversation over. I'll review the merger proposal and get back to you by Friday. As she reached the door, I called after her. Does Jason know about his father? She paused, one hand on the doorknob. No, she said without turning around. Dad made me promise never to tell him. He thought it would only create more problems. After she left, I sat in our father's chair, contemplating the complexities of family secrets and the damage they could cause. William Taylor had protected Henry Reed at the cost of his relationship with his brother. He had made Rebecca promise to keep that secret from her husband, perhaps inadvertently creating the conditions for history to repeat itself. And I had kept my own secrets. The evidence of Rebecca and Jason's crimes remained secured in multiple locations. Insurance against future betrayal. Where did protection end and destructive secrecy begin? The merger negotiations progressed over the next several weeks, with Rebecca proving herself to be a surprisingly constructive partner once she'd accepted the basic premise. She identified potential client conflicts that hadn't occurred to me, suggested modifications to the financial structure that actually improved the terms, and even reached out to Liam directly to discuss operational questions. Meanwhile, I dove into the design services division concept, developing a business plan that would position Taylor Construction as a full-service firm, offering both construction and architectural design under one roof. It was an idea I'd suggested to my father years ago, before leaving to start my own architecture practice, but he had been resistant to changing the company's core identity. Now, with Rebecca's client relationships and my design expertise, we had the foundation to build something truly innovative. For brief moments, working side by side on the expansion plans, I could almost forget the betrayal that had brought us to this point. Almost. The illusion of reconciliation was shattered. One Tuesday afternoon when Olivia Rodriguez requested an urgent meeting. The private investigator had continued monitoring Jason Reed's activities at my request, a precaution I hadn't shared with Rebecca. "He's meeting with Martin Davies," Olivia informed me without preamble when we met at the summit, the same discreet restaurant where she had first shared her findings about Rebecca and Jason's schemes. The name meant nothing to me. "Who is Martin Davies?" "Senior VP at Blackwell Development," she replied, sliding a photograph across the table. It showed Jason sitting at an outdoor cafe with an older man in an expensive suit. "Blackwell is Taylor Construction's main competitor in the region." A chill ran through me. "You think Jason is sharing inside information about our company?" "I think it's worse than that," Olivia said grimly. "Based on the surveillance and some financial tracking, I believe Jason is trying to orchestrate a hostile takeover." "That's impossible," I said automatically. "Rebecca and I control the company equally. No outside entity could force a takeover without one of us agreeing." "Unless one of you sells your shares," Olivia pointed out. "Or unless there's a clause in your father's will or the company bylaws that creates a vulnerability." I thought back to the documents Daniel had prepared, the restructuring we had implemented. There were protections in place specifically to prevent either Rebecca or me from selling shares without the other's approval. But there was also the performance clause, I murmured, remembering a provision my father had insisted on years ago. If the company's profitability falls below a certain threshold for 3 consecutive quarters, the board of directors can vote to bring in outside management or approve a sale. Olivia nodded. "And who controls your board?" "It's balanced. 3 members aligned with me, 3 with Rebecca, and 1 independent director approved by both of us." "And if that independent director could be swayed, perhaps through financial incentives or other persuasion?" The implications hit me with full force. If Jason was working with Blackwell Development, if they managed to manipulate the company's performance metrics or influence our independent director, they could potentially force a sale, one that would leave Rebecca and me with money but no control over our family legacy. "I need to warn Rebecca," I said, gathering my things. Olivia caught my wrist. "Are you sure that's wise? We don't know if she's involved." The question gave me pause. Was it possible Rebecca knew about Jason's meetings with Blackwell? Was this her way of regaining control after being forced to accept equal partnership with me? I need to find out, I decided. But first, I need more information. Get me everything you can on Martin Davies and the current financial situation at Blackwell. And I want surveillance on our independent director, Harold Winters. Already on it, Olivia assured me. I've also taken the liberty of placing additional security measures on your home and office. If they're willing to orchestrate a hostile takeover, they might not stop there. The warning reminded me uncomfortably of my accident just after my father's death. The brake lines that had been tampered with, sending me into a head-on collision that nearly claimed my life. If Jason had been willing to go that far once, what would stop him from trying again? "Thank you," I said sincerely. "Keep me updated on any developments." Back at Taylor Construction headquarters, I asked Helen to clear my afternoon appointments and closed my office door, needing time to think. If I confronted Rebecca without proof, she would likely deny everything, potentially warning Jason that I was onto them. If I waited too long, the takeover plan might progress beyond my ability to stop it. I pulled up the company's financial reports for the past 2 quarters, looking for any signs of manipulation. Nothing obvious stood out. Revenue was slightly down compared to the previous year, but that was expected given the disruption caused by my father's death and the subsequent leadership transition. Next, I examined the projects currently in development. One in particular caught my attention: the Riverside Commercial Complex, a major development that had been secured during my time in the hospital. The contract terms seemed unusually favorable to the client, with penalty clauses that could cost Taylor Construction significantly if deadlines weren't met. I picked up the phone and called Michael Chen, who had been helping oversee our financial restructuring. "I need you to look into something," I told him after explaining my concerns. "The Riverside contract? Who negotiated it? Who approved those terms?" "I'll check and get back to you," he promised. "But Emma, if you're right about this, we need to move carefully. Accusing your sister of deliberately sabotaging company projects is serious." "I know," I sighed. "Just get me the information, and we'll decide next steps from there." While waiting for Michael's response, I found myself drawn to the small framed photo on my desk. My mother, father, Rebecca, and me at the lake cabin, taken perhaps 15 years earlier. Rebecca and I had our arms around each other, genuine smiles on our faces, no hint of the chasm that would eventually divide us. What had changed? When had competition replaced connection? When had Rebecca's ambition twisted into something darker? Something willing to sacrifice ethics and family bonds for control and status? My reflection was interrupted by a knock at my door. To my surprise, it was Jason Reed, immaculately dressed as always in a tailored navy suit, his expression pleasantly neutral. "Do you have a moment, Emma?" he asked, his tone carefully cordial. "There's something I'd like to discuss." Every instinct warned me to be cautious, but curiosity won out. "Of course. Come in." He took a seat across from me, looking oddly comfortable despite the circumstances. Jason had been noticeably absent from Taylor Construction since our confrontation, in Daniel's office, supposedly focusing on his own struggling real estate business while Rebecca handled their end of the company management. "I've been doing some thinking," he began, his voice carrying the smooth confidence that had likely served him well in business negotiations. "About the company, about the future, about this arrangement between you and Rebecca." "And?" I prompted when he paused. "And I think there might be a better way forward for everyone." He leaned forward slightly. "The merger with Liam's company is a solid idea, but limited in scope. What if we considered a larger strategic partnership? One that could take Taylor Construction national?" The vague proposal raised immediate red flags. "What kind of partnership?" "Blackwell Development has expressed interest in a potential merger," Jason said, watching my reaction carefully. "They have the national presence, the capital for expansion. Combined with Taylor's regional reputation and client base, it could be transformative." There it was. Confirmation of exactly what Olivia had warned me about, though presented as a business opportunity rather than the hostile action it truly represented. "Interesting," I said, keeping my expression neutral. "And how did Blackwell come to express this interest? Through you?" A flicker of something Wariness, perhaps, crossed his face before the smooth mask returned. I have some contacts there from previous real estate ventures. When they heard about the potential Chicago expansion, they reached out to discuss broader possibilities. I see. And does Rebecca know you're having these discussions? We've talked about it in general terms, he hedged. She thought it would be best if I approached you directly, professional to professional. Another lie. I was certain Rebecca would never have suggested Jason approach me alone, not after everything that had happened between us. Well, I appreciate the initiative, I said, matching his professional tone. But any major partnership decisions would need to go through our board, with full financial disclosure and proper due diligence. I assume Blackwell would be open to that level of transparency? Something hardened in his eyes, though his smile remained fixed. Of course. I'll let them know you're interested in pursuing discussions. I didn't say I was interested, I corrected mildly. I said any proposal would require proper evaluation through established channels. There's a difference. He stood buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. Of course, I'll relay your concerns about process. But Emma, opportunities like this don't come along often. It would be a shame to miss it because of personal complications. The thinly veiled threat didn't escape me. I never let personal feelings interfere with good business decisions, Jason. I would have thought recent events made that clear. After he left, I immediately called Olivia to update her on the unexpected visit. He's accelerating the timeline, she agreed when I described our conversation. Probably because my surveillance was spotted. They know we're watching. What's our next move? I have a contact at Blackwell, she said. Someone who might be willing to share details about their real intentions. Give me 24 hours. Next, I called Michael, who had troubling news about the Riverside project. The contract was negotiated by Jason and approved by Rebecca while you were in the hospital, he confirmed. And there's more. 3 other major projects have similar unfavorable terms, all processed during the same period. They were deliberating, setting us up to fail, I realized, creating the conditions to trigger the performance clause. It looks that way, Michael agreed. The good news is we can renegotiate some of these terms now that we're aware of the issue. The clients have no interest in seeing Taylor Construction fail. They just want their projects completed. Start that process immediately, I instructed. And Michael, not a word about this to anyone, especially not to Rebecca or Jason. My final call was to Uncle Liam, who listened gravely to my abbreviated explanation of the situation. I'm not entirely surprised, he admitted. Jason's father tried something similar with a competitor back in the day, before your father caught on to his financial manipulations. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, it seems. I need advice, I told him frankly. I'm not sure whether to confront Rebecca directly or gather more evidence first. Liam was quiet for a moment, considering. Your sister has a choice to make, he said finally, between her husband and her family legacy. The question is whether you trust her to make the right one. Trust. The word seemed almost laughable given our recent history. Did I trust Rebecca? To choose Taylor Construction over Jason? To honor our father's legacy above her own ambitions? The evidence suggested otherwise. Yet something held me back from immediately assuming the worst. Perhaps it was the memory of our childhood closeness, or the glimpses of genuine engagement I'd seen during our work on the expansion plans. Or perhaps it was simply the hope that underneath the hurt and betrayal, some core of sisterly connection remained. I'll give her the chance, I decided, but I'll be prepared either way. The opportunity came sooner than expected. That evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, Rebecca appeared in my doorway, her expression uncharacteristically uncertain. Do you have dinner plans? She asked. There's something we need to discuss. We ended up at Salvatore's. a small Italian restaurant our father had favored for business dinners, requiring privacy and discretion. The owner, recognizing us as William Taylor's daughters, led us to a secluded booth in the back, away from other diners. After we ordered, Rebecca wasted no time. "Jason told me he spoke with you today." "He did," I confirmed, watching her carefully. "About a potential partnership with Blackwell Development." "What did you tell him?" "That any such proposal would need to go through proper channels and due diligence." I sipped my water, maintaining eye contact. What I didn't tell him was that I already knew about his meetings with Martin Davies, or about the deliberately unfavorable contracts negotiated while I was in the hospital. Rebecca's composure slipped, genuine surprise crossing her features. "What are you talking about? What unfavorable contracts?" Either she was an excellent actress or she truly didn't know. I decided to take a calculated risk. The Riverside Project, among others. Jason negotiated terms that practically guarantee financial penalties for Taylor Construction. Combined with 3 similar projects, it creates a pattern that could trigger the performance clause in the company bylaws. She shook her head slowly, confusion evident. "That doesn't make sense. Why would Jason negotiate bad terms for our company?" "To create the conditions for a takeover," I said bluntly. "If Taylor Construction's profitability drops below the threshold for 3 quarters, the board can vote to bring in outside management or approve a sale. With the right influence on our independent director, Blackwell could force an acquisition." Rebecca set down her wine glass with a sharp click against the table. "You're saying my husband is deliberately sabotaging our family company to orchestrate a hostile takeover?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," I confirmed. "The question is, are you part of it?" Her eyes widened, genuine hurt flashing across her face before anger replaced it. "How can you even ask me that? After everything? After you stole my inheritance?" I interrupted. "After you potentially tampered with my car, putting me in the hospital? After you manipulated our dying father into signing a fraudulent will?" "Yes, Rebecca, I can ask that question quite easily." She flinched as if I'd struck her. "I never touched your car," she said quietly, intensity rather than volume lending weight to her words. "I would never. No matter how angry or jealous or resentful I felt, I would never have done that." For reasons I couldn't fully articulate, I believed her, at least about the car. "Then who did?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But when I found out about your accident, my first thought was relief that you were alive, not fear that you'd survive to challenge the will." "And the will itself? Dad's signature?" She looked down at her hands, her usual confidence absent. "That was my idea. Jason said we needed to secure control of the company before you recovered, that it was our only chance to keep things running the way Dad would have wanted. So you guided Dad's hand to sign documents while he was heavily sedated," I finished for her, "because Jason convinced you it was necessary." "He said we'd fix it later," she whispered. "That once things were stable, we'd amend the terms to be more fair. I knew it was wrong, but I was scared, Emma. Scared of losing the company, scared of failing Dad's legacy." I studied my sister's face, seeing not the polished corporate executive she presented to the world, but the insecure younger sibling who had always feared she couldn't measure up. To our father's expectations, to my achievements, to her own. Impossible standards. "And now?" I asked. "What are you scared of now?" She met my eyes directly, vulnerability replacing her usual armor. "I'm scared that Jason is not who I thought he was. That I've made terrible mistakes trying to please people who couldn't be pleased. That I've destroyed whatever chance we had of being sisters again." The raw honesty in her voice reached something in me that strategic calculations and business negotiations couldn't touch. For the first time since discovering the fraudulent will, I saw Rebecca not as an antagonist, but as someone who had made devastating choices under the influence of a manipulative partner, choices she was only now beginning to fully comprehend. If what you're saying is true, I said carefully, then we need to decide what happens next, together. She nodded, straightening her shoulders with visible effort. I need to see the evidence about the contracts, about Jason's meetings with Blackwell. I'll have Michael prepare a complete briefing for tomorrow morning, I promised. But Rebecca, if this confirms what I've told you, what will you do? The question hung between us, heavy with implication. Her answer would determine not just the future of Taylor Construction, but the possibility of any relationship between us moving forward. I'll do what I should have done from the beginning, she said, her voice gaining strength. I'll protect our family legacy, whatever that requires. As we finished our meal, discussing next steps and security precautions, I realized we had reached a turning point. Not reconciliation, exactly, but perhaps the beginning of a new understanding. The path forward remained uncertain, fraught with complications both professional and personal. But for the first time since waking in that hospital bed to discover my world had been shattered, I felt a cautious hope that something valuable might be salvaged from the wreckage. Not just the company our grandfather had founded, but the sister I had lost long before any inheritance was stolen. The morning after my dinner with Rebecca, I arrived at the office early to prepare for what would undoubtedly be a decisive day. Michael was already there, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd worked through the night compiling the evidence against Jason. It's worse than we thought, he said without preamble, handing me a thick folder. Those contracts were just the beginning. Jason has been systematically undermining Taylor Construction's financial position for months. I flipped through the documents, a knot forming in my stomach as I absorbed the details. False invoices, canceled orders that were never reported to accounting, deliberately delayed payments to trigger penalty clauses. The pattern was unmistakable and damning. And his connection to Blackwell? I asked. Michael pulled up an email on his tablet. Martin Davies and Jason have been communicating since before your father died. Initially about routine industry matters, but the tone changed dramatically after your accident. They started discussing strategic opportunities and transition scenarios. Can we prove Jason was behind my accident? Michael hesitated. Nothing definitive, but there's a text message from Jason to an unknown number the day before your brakes failed, asking about the mechanical issue we discussed, and confirming payment of $5,000. The number is a burner phone, untraceable. The confirmation of what I had long suspected should have brought anger, perhaps even vindication. Instead, I felt only a deep sadness. For my father, who had never seen Jason's true character. For Rebecca, whose trust had been so thoroughly betrayed. And even for myself, forced into this position of investigation and judgment when all I had ever wanted was to pursue my own architectural career. Is Rebecca here yet? I asked, glancing at my watch. She just arrived. I put her in the small conference room as you suggested. Olivia is with her, going through the surveillance photos. I gathered the files and made my way to the conference room, steeling myself for what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation. When I entered, Rebecca was standing by the window, her back to the door, shoulders rigid with tension. Olivia sat at the table, her professional demeanor firmly in place despite the emotionally charged atmosphere. He's been planning this for over a year, Rebecca said without turning, her voice flat. Since before Dad got sick. Since before your accident. It appears that way, I confirmed, setting down the files. Michael found evidence suggesting the communication with Blackwell began much earlier than we thought. She turned then, and I was struck by how pale she looked, how vulnerable, without her usual perfect makeup and confident posture. For perhaps the first time in our adult lives, Rebecca had dropped the facade she maintained so carefully. I never saw it, she said softly. All those late meetings, the sudden interest in contracts he'd previously ignored, the insistence that we needed to consolidate control before you recovered. I thought he was being supportive, stepping up to help me protect our family legacy. He played on your concerns, Olivia observed neutrally. Used your complicated feelings about your sister and your desire to please your father to manipulate you into actions you might otherwise have questioned. Rebecca didn't dispute this assessment. She moved to the table and picked up one of the key surveillance photos showing Jason and Martin Davies in what appeared to be a tense conversation. This was taken 3 days ago, she noted. The same day he told me he was meeting with our banking partners about refinancing options. I exchanged a glance with Olivia, who nodded almost imperceptibly. The timing confirmed our suspicion that Jason was accelerating his plans, perhaps pressured by Blackwell to deliver results before our merger with Uncle Liam's company could be finalized. We need to decide how to handle this, I said, taking a seat across from Rebecca. Legally, strategically, and personally. She looked up sharply. Personally? He's your husband, Rebecca. Whatever we do next affects you on multiple levels. A bitter smile curved her lips. My husband, the man who apparently orchestrated my sister's near-fatal accident, manipulated me into defrauding my dying father, and has been plotting to sell our family company out from under us. Yes, I suppose that does complicate things personally. Her tone was harsh, but I could hear the pain underneath. The realization that her marriage, like so much else in her carefully constructed life, had been built on deception. What do you want to do? I asked quietly. She squared her shoulders, something of her usual determination returning. I want to protect Taylor Construction. I want justice for what he tried to do to you, and I want him out of my life. Those goals may be somewhat at odds, Olivia pointed out. If we pursue criminal charges for the financial fraud or the accident, it becomes public. The company's reputation will suffer, regardless of the outcome. And if we handle it privately? Rebecca asked. Then we contain the damage, but risk Jason making another attempt later, I explained. He knows too much about our operations, our vulnerabilities. Rebecca was silent for a long moment, absently turning her wedding ring around her finger. He won't stop, she said finally. Whatever approach we take, Jason will see it as a temporary setback, not a defeat. That's how he operates. She was right, and it presented us with a dilemma. Criminal charges would be messy in public, potentially damaging Taylor Construction beyond repair. A private resolution might preserve the company's reputation, but leave us vulnerable to future machinations from a man who had already proven himself dangerous and unethical. There might be a third option, Olivia suggested carefully, a compromise that achieves your primary goals while mitigating the risks. We both turned to her, and as she outlined her proposal, I felt a grudging admiration for its strategic elegance. It would require careful execution, absolute discretion, and, most challenging of all, Rebecca and me working in perfect synchronization despite our fractured relationship. But if it succeeded, it could solve our Jason problem permanently, preserve the company's standing, and even provide a measure of justice for the harm he had caused. It's risky, I cautioned when Olivia finished explaining. If any part of this goes wrong. I'll do it, Rebecca interrupted, her decision apparently made. It's my responsibility. I brought Jason into our lives, into the company. I need to be the one to remove him. I studied my sister's face, seeing determination, but also fear. Resolve mingled with uncertainty. We'll do it together, I corrected gently. That's the only way this works. The surprise in her eyes was quickly masked, but not before I caught. In surprise that after everything that had happened between us, I would stand beside her in this moment of crisis. Together then, she agreed, holding my gaze with newfound respect. When? Tonight, Olivia advised. Before Jason has a chance to move forward with Blackwell or destroy any additional evidence. As we finalize the details of our plan, I found myself in the strange position of plotting with Rebecca rather than against her, united by a common enemy and a shared determination to protect what our grandfather and father had built. It wasn't reconciliation, exactly, but it was something I hadn't thought possible just days earlier. Collaboration. When Rebecca left to prepare for her role in the evening's confrontation, Olivia remained behind, her expression thoughtful. "You know this doesn't erase what she did," she observed. "The will, the inheritance, all of it. That was still her choice, even if Jason influenced her." "I know," I acknowledged, "but people are complicated. Motivations are rarely simple." "And forgiveness?" Olivia asked. "Is that part of your plan as well?" I considered the question carefully. Not forgiveness, exactly. Understanding, maybe. A willingness to move forward without letting the past dictate every future interaction. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. "Just be careful. Family dynamics can cloud judgment, even for the most clear-headed among us." The warning was fair. Throughout this ordeal, I had tried to separate emotion from strategy, personal hurt from professional decisions. But Rebecca was my sister. Our histories intertwined in ways too complex to fully unravel. Whatever happened tonight would shape not just the future of Taylor Construction, but the possibility of any relationship between us going forward. I spent the remainder of the day finalizing the merger paperwork with Uncle Liam, ensuring that regardless of the outcome with Jason, the Chicago expansion would proceed as planned. It gave me a sense of forward momentum, of building something positive amid the chaos of betrayal and deception. At precisely 7 o'clock that evening, I arrived at Rebecca and Jason's home in Lakeview Estates, a sprawling contemporary mansion purchased with embezzled funds from Taylor Construction. The irony wasn't lost on me as I handed my keys to the valet they employed despite their supposed financial difficulties. Rebecca met me at the door, perfectly composed in a navy cocktail dress, her makeup flawless, her smile practiced. Only the slight tremor in her hand as she took my coat betrayed her nervousness. "He's in the study," she said quietly. "Blackwell's board approved their initial offer this afternoon. He's been celebrating." The information was significant. If Blackwell had moved to a formal offer, our window for intervention was narrowing rapidly. "Are you ready?" I asked, searching her face for any signs of wavering. She nodded once, determination evident in the set of her jaw. "Let's get this over with." The house was impeccably decorated, every surface gleaming, every item carefully selected to project wealth and taste. It struck me suddenly how important appearances had always been to Rebecca. The right clothes, the right house, the right husband. How much of her life had been constructed around maintaining the image she thought others expected of her. We found Jason in his study, a glass of expensive scotch in hand, reviewing documents spread across an ornate desk. He looked up as we entered, surprise quickly masked by a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Emma," he greeted, rising smoothly. "I didn't realize you were joining us for dinner." "Change of plans," Rebecca explained, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "We need to discuss some developments with the Taylor Construction Board." Jason's expression sharpened, interest replacing his initial wariness. "Has Harold Winters made a decision about the Blackwell proposal?" "Not exactly," I replied, taking a seat without waiting for an invitation. "But there have been some interesting financial discoveries that affect the company's position." Rebecca moved to stand beside me rather than next to her husband, a subtle but significant shift in allegiance that didn't escape Jason's notice. His eyes narrowed slightly, gaze moving between us with growing suspicion. "What kind of discoveries?" he asked carefully. Rebecca opened the folder she had brought with her, sliding it across the desk toward him. "These, for a start, financial records showing systematic embezzlement from Taylor Construction over the past 3 years. Falsified invoices, manipulated contract terms, diverted payments." Jason glanced at the documents, his expression remaining impressively neutral. These look concerning, certainly. Have you identified who's responsible? The calm denial was exactly what we had expected, but Rebecca still flinched slightly at his audacity, at the ease with which he could look her in the eye and pretend innocence despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. We have, I confirmed, meeting his gaze directly. The records trace back to you, Jason. Your digital signature, your banking information, your correspondence with vendors. He laughed, the sound containing no actual humor. That's absurd. Anyone could have used my credentials. This is clearly an attempt to undermine my position in the company, probably orchestrated by you, Emma, to consolidate your control. It's not just the financial records, Rebecca said quietly, her voice gaining strength as she continued. We have your communications with Martin Davies at Blackwell Development, documenting a conspiracy to devalue Taylor Construction and force a sale. For the first time, genuine alarm flickered across Jason's features, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. You've been spying on me? Going through my private communications? We've been investigating financial crimes against our family company, I corrected. The fact that those crimes implicate you isn't our fault. He stood abruptly, moving to the bar cart in the corner to refill his scotch, perhaps needing a moment to collect himself. When he turned back, his composure had returned, calculation replacing surprise in his eyes. Let's say, hypothetically, that some of these allegations have merit, he began, adopting a reasonable tone. The smart move here would be a negotiated settlement. I step away from Taylor Construction, perhaps with a generous severance package, and we all avoid the public mess of litigation. Rebecca exchanged a glance with me, following the script we had carefully prepared. That might be possible, she conceded. Under certain conditions. Hope flickered in Jason's expression. The belief that he could still manipulate the situation still emerge relatively unscathed. I'm listening. First, you sign a binding agreement to never contact anyone at Blackwell Development again, professionally or personally, I stated. Second, you provide a complete accounting of all funds taken from Taylor Construction and agree to a repayment schedule. Third, Rebecca added, her voice hardening, you turn over all evidence related to Emma's accident. The name of the person you hired, proof of payment, everything. Jason's face went carefully blank. I don't know what you're talking about. We have the text messages, Jason, I said quietly, about the mechanical issue and the $5,000 payment. Sent the day before someone tampered with my brake lines. That could have referred to anything, he dismissed, though sweat had begun to bead at his temples. You can't prove? Fourth, Rebecca interrupted, you agree to a divorce settlement that reflects the reality of your actions. My lawyers will draft the terms, and you will sign them without contest. The final condition seemed to hit him hardest. His eyes widened fractionally, genuine shock breaking through his calculated facade. Perhaps he had believed that Rebecca's loyalty would ultimately outweigh any evidence, that their marriage would survive even if his business schemes were exposed. You can't be serious, he said, addressing Rebecca directly now. After everything we've built together, you're throwing it all away because of some financial irregularities? Some wild accusations about an accident? Financial irregularities? Rebecca repeated, incredulity coloring her tone. You stole millions from our family company. You conspired with our largest competitor to orchestrate a hostile takeover. You possibly arranged to have my sister killed in a car accident. And you manipulated me into defrauding my dying father. Her voice broke slightly on the final accusation, the emotional impact of his betrayal momentarily overwhelming her carefully. Maintained composure. That's your interpretation, Jason argued, switching tactics. The reality is more complex. Everything I did was to secure our future, Rebecca, to ensure Taylor Construction remained viable in a changing market. Your father was making outdated decisions. Emma had abandoned the company years ago. Someone needed to take decisive action. By stealing and lying? I asked. By nearly killing me? He ignored my question, focusing solely on Rebecca. We can fix this, he insisted, moving toward her. Together, like we've always done. Don't let Emma drive a wedge between us. She's always been jealous of what we have, of your position in the company, of our lifestyle. It was a desperate play, a final attempt to rekindle the loyalty Rebecca had shown him throughout their marriage. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across my sister's face, and I feared that Jason's manipulation might succeed where facts and evidence had failed. But then Rebecca straightened, stepping away from her husband's approach. You drove the wedge, Jason. Every lie, every theft, every betrayal. Those were your choices, not Emma's. He stared at her, perhaps truly seeing her for the first time, not as the malleable partner he had manipulated for years, but as a woman reclaiming her own agency, her own moral clarity. You need me, he tried, one last desperate argument. You've always needed me. Without me, you're just the less talented Taylor sister trying to fill your father's shoes. The cruel assessment hung in the air between them, a final attempt to wound Rebecca where she was most vulnerable. Her insecurities about her place in the family legacy, her fear of inadequacy compared to our father's achievements. But Rebecca merely smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. Maybe I am, she acknowledged, but I'd rather be honest about my limitations than build my life on lies and theft. She turned to me. I think we're done here. Jason has until tomorrow morning to decide whether he accepts our terms or faces criminal charges. As we moved toward the door, Jason called after us, desperation finally breaking through his controlled facade. You won't do it. You won't risk the public scandal, the damage to the company's reputation. I paused, looking back at the man who had nearly destroyed our family in pursuit of wealth and control. You underestimated us once before, Jason. I wouldn't make that mistake again. Outside, in the cool evening air, Rebecca exhaled slowly, weeks of tension seemingly leaving her body with that single breath. He'll fight, she predicted. He's too proud, too convinced of his own cleverness, to accept defeat gracefully. Probably, I agreed. But he's also practical. When he weighs his options, criminal charges versus a private settlement, I think his pragmatism will win out. We walked to our separate cars in silence, the confrontation having drained both of us. As Rebecca reached for her door handle, she hesitated, turning back to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Thank you, she said simply, for standing with me tonight. You didn't have to. Yes, I did, I replied. He hurt both of us, in different ways, and Taylor Construction needs both of us to recover from the damage he's done. She nodded, accepting this professional justification for what had been, perhaps, a more complex personal choice on my part. I'll call you in the morning after I hear from him. Be careful, I cautioned. Jason has nothing left to lose now, if he decides to fight rather than settle. I know, she acknowledged. I've arranged to stay at the lake cabin tonight, somewhere he won't think to look immediately. The mention of the cabin, the place our mother had hidden her evidence, the supposed consolation prize in the fraudulent will, struck me as fitting. Rebecca was returning to the very place that had ultimately saved me, seeking her own form of sanctuary. Good, I said. I'll have Olivia keep an eye on the house, just in case. As I drove home, the events of the evening replayed in my mind. Jason's cool denial, his pivot to negotiation when confronted with evidence, his final desperate attempt to manipulate Rebecca, all consistent with the calculating personality that had orchestrated such elaborate deception. Yet something about the confrontation nagged at me, a loose thread in an otherwise tightly woven narrative. Jason had seemed genuinely shocked by Rebecca's decision to divorce him, suggesting he hadn't anticipated her breaking point. But he had also moved too quickly to damage control, as if he had prepared for the possibility of exposure. Most troubling was his reaction to the accusation about my accident. He had dismissed it too casually, too confidently. Most people, when falsely accused of attempted murder, respond with outrage, with emphatic denial. Jason had merely deflected, suggesting we couldn't prove anything. I called Olivia from my car, sharing these concerns. "Keep the surveillance on the house tonight," I instructed, "and see if you can get access to his phone records from the days surrounding my accident. I want to know who he was communicating with." "You think there's more we don't know?" she asked. "I think Jason is the type to have contingency plans," I replied, "and I don't want to be surprised by whatever he might do next." The following morning brought news that confirmed my suspicions. Jason had vacated the house sometime during the night, taking only a small suitcase and his passport. More concerningly, he had accessed the Taylor construction servers remotely, downloading sensitive financial and client information before his credentials could be revoked. "He's running," Michael concluded when we gathered in my office to assess the situation. "The question is where and what he plans to do with that information." Rebecca, who had returned from the lake cabin at my urgent summons, looked exhausted, but resolute. "He has dual citizenship with Italy through his mother's family. That would be my guess, somewhere with limited extradition options." Olivia nodded in agreement. My contact at the airport confirmed a passenger matching Jason's description boarded a flight to Rome late last night. First class, paid in cash. "And the company information he stole?" I asked. Michael grimaced. "Detailed enough to cause significant damage if released to competitors or the press. Client lists, bid strategies, financial projections. Essentially a roadmap of Taylor Construction's operations for the next 2 years." The implications were clear. Jason might have fled, but his capacity to harm the company remained substantial. If he decided on revenge rather than self-preservation, he could potentially fulfill his original goal of devaluing Taylor Construction, making it vulnerable to acquisition even without his direct involvement. "We need to get ahead of this," I decided. "Contact all major clients personally, advise them of a potential data breach without specifying details. Accelerate the merger with Uncle Liam's company to stabilize our market position, and implement the crisis communication plan we developed after the Will situation." Rebecca surprised me by adding, "I'll reach out to Martin Davies at Blackwell. Jason may attempt to continue their arrangement remotely. Better to cut that off directly." "You think Davies will admit to the conspiracy?" Michael asked skeptically. "No," Rebecca acknowledged. "But making it clear that we know about their communications might make him think twice about further involvement. Blackwell has its own reputation to protect." As the meeting adjourned and the others left to implement our countermeasures, Rebecca lingered, her expression troubled. "This is my fault," she said quietly when we were alone. "I brought Jason into our lives, into the company. I defended him to Dad, to you, to anyone who questioned his intentions. Everything that's happening now stems from my poor judgment." The self-recrimination in her voice was painful to hear, not because I disagreed with her assessment, but because I recognized in it the same crushing guilt I had sometimes felt about my own failures and missteps. "You made mistakes," I acknowledged, seeing no benefit in false comfort. "Serious ones. But Jason is responsible for his own actions. He chose deception over honesty, manipulation over partnership, theft over honest work. And now he's gone, with the means to continue damaging what our family built," she said bitterly. "Some legacy I've protected." I considered her words, the anguish behind them, and found myself offering what I had never expected to give: perspective that acknowledged her pain without dismissing accountability. Legacy isn't static, Rebecca. It's not just what we inherit, but what we do with it. How we respond when things go wrong. How we rebuild when foundations crack. She looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "You think we can rebuild? After everything that's happened?" "I think we're already doing it," I replied. "The merger with Uncle Liam's company, the new design services division, the board restructuring. None of that erases what happened, but it does create something new from what remains." A tentative hope flickered in her eyes, quickly tempered by realism. "Jason will still try to hurt us. He won't just disappear quietly." "Probably not," I agreed. "But we're prepared now. No more secrets between us, no more divided loyalties. Whatever he does next, we face it together." The promise felt significant, not forgiveness exactly, but a commitment to shared purpose despite our complicated history. Rebecca seemed to understand this distinction, nodding once in acknowledgement of both what was offered and what wasn't. "Together, then," she echoed, the words carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. "I should go call Davies now, before Jason has a chance to reach him." As she turned to leave, my phone buzzed with a notification, an email from an unknown address with an attachment. Opening it cautiously, I found myself staring at a video file labeled, "For Emma Taylor's Eyes Only." The sender information was encrypted, but the message content was clear. "Insurance policy in case certain parties don't honor our agreement. You'll want to watch this privately." Rebecca, seeing my expression change, paused at the door. "What is it?" I hesitated, uncertain whether to share something potentially volatile without first understanding its contents. But the lesson of recent weeks had been clear. Secrets between us created vulnerabilities that others could exploit. "Something from Jason, I think," I said, turning the screen so she could see. "An insurance policy, according to the message." She paled slightly, but maintained her composure. "Play it," she said, closing the door and returning to stand beside my desk. "Whatever it is, we should face it together." I clicked the video file, and Jason's face appeared on screen, his expression composed, almost smug. "Hello, Emma," he began. "If you're watching this, our negotiation didn't go as planned, and I've been forced to implement contingency measures." Rebecca's hand gripped the edge of my desk, her knuckles whitening, but she remained silent as Jason continued. "You think you know the full story about your accident, about the will, about everything that's happened since your father's death. But trust me when I say you've only scratched the surface." His smile widened, satisfaction evident in his expression. "The truth is far more interesting and far more damaging to people you still trust." As the video continued, revealing details that neither Rebecca nor I had anticipated, I realized that our journey toward resolution was far from complete. Jason's final act of retaliation would force us to confront not just his betrayal, but deeper secrets within the Taylor family. Secrets that would test the fragile alliance Rebecca and I had begun to build amid the ruins of our inherited legacy. Jason's face on the screen was composed, almost smug as he delivered what he clearly believed was his final, devastating blow. "You both thought this was simple, that I was the villain in your family drama. But let me enlighten you about what really happened the day your father died." Rebecca and I exchanged glances, tension radiating between us as Jason continued. "William Taylor didn't just have a heart attack. He was confronting someone about financial discrepancies he'd discovered. Someone he trusted implicitly." Jason leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "Your father had finally noticed the systematic theft occurring under his nose. But it wasn't just me he was confronting that day." My stomach tightened as Jason's implication became clear. Rebecca was there, of course, my loyal wife, always willing to support my initiatives. But so was Daniel Peterson, your trusted family attorney, the man who's been playing both sides throughout this entire situation. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Daniel had presented himself as reluctantly complicit in the fraudulent will, pressured by circumstances. beyond his control. The idea that he had been actively involved from the beginning, present during my father's final confrontation, cast everything in a disturbing new light. Daniel has been siphoning funds from Taylor Construction for over a decade, Jason continued. Your father discovered it accidentally while reviewing some old accounting files. When he confronted us that day, Daniel was the one who suggested altering the will while you were incapacitated, Emma. My involvement with Blackwell came later, an opportunity that presented itself when I realized how vulnerable the company truly was. Rebecca sank into a chair, her face ashen. That can't be true, she whispered. Dad trusted Daniel completely. As for your accident, Jason's recorded image continued, you've been looking in the wrong direction entirely. I never touched your car, Emma. Neither did Rebecca. Ask yourself who benefited most from having you out of the way during those critical days. Who had access to both the family finances and the legal mechanisms to alter your inheritance? The video ended abruptly, freezing on Jason's satisfied expression before cutting to black. The implications hung in the air between us, too significant to dismiss but too devastating to immediately accept. He's lying, Rebecca said firmly, though uncertainty threaded through her voice. He's trying to shift blame, create confusion. Turn us against each other again? Possibly, I agreed, though my mind was already racing through past interactions with Daniel, searching for inconsistencies, for signs I might have missed. But we need to verify, one way or the other. I picked up my phone and called Olivia, putting her on speaker. After explaining what we'd just seen, I asked, is it possible? Could Daniel have been involved at that level? It's worth investigating, she replied cautiously. Daniel Peterson has been the Taylor family attorney for over 30 years. He would have intimate knowledge of the company finances, legal vulnerabilities, family dynamics. And he's been cooperative, perhaps too cooperative, since you confronted him about the will. Too cooperative how? Rebecca asked, leaning toward the phone. He capitulated immediately when Emma confronted him, Olivia pointed out. No real resistance, no attempt to defend himself beyond token protests. That always struck me as unusual for a man of his professional standing and experience. I thought back to that confrontation in Daniel's office, his quick surrender, his apparent remorse. Had it been genuine contrition or calculated self-preservation? We need access to Daniel's financial records, I decided, and we need to know exactly what happened the day Dad died. I can get started on the financials, Olivia confirmed, but for the events of that day, you might need a more direct approach. After ending the call, Rebecca and I sat in silence for a moment, processing the implications of Jason's claims. If Daniel had indeed been embezzling from Taylor Construction for years, it would explain why he had so readily assisted with the fraudulent will, not just out of loyalty to my father or pressure from Rebecca and Jason, but to protect his own criminal activity. I was there that day, Rebecca said suddenly, when Dad collapsed. But it wasn't how Jason described it, at least not entirely. I turned to her surprised. You never told me exactly what happened. She nodded, her expression troubled. Dad called an emergency meeting, just him, me, Jason, and Daniel. He said he'd discovered financial irregularities that needed immediate attention. But before he could explain further, he clutched his chest and collapsed. Everything after that was chaos, calling the ambulance, getting him to the hospital, waiting for news. And you never learned what irregularities he'd discovered? Jason said later that Dad was confused, that he'd misinterpreted some routine accounting adjustments. I believed him. She looked up, guilt evident in her expression. I wanted to believe him. The admission hung between us, a reminder of how easily we accept explanations that align with what we want to be true, particularly from those we trust. What about Daniel? I pressed. How did he react during all this? Rebecca frowned, clearly struggling to recall details from such a traumatic moment. He was calm, I think, collected. He took charge of the situation while I was panicking. Called the ambulance, contacted medical staff he knew at the hospital to ensure Dad received immediate care when we arrived. And afterward, when Dad was in critical condition, he was the one who brought up the need to secure the company, she said slowly, realization dawning in her eyes. Said we needed to ensure stability during the crisis. That's when discussions about the will began. This aligned with Jason's accusations in a way that was impossible to ignore. If Daniel had indeed orchestrated the conversation about changing my father's will, it suggested a calculated effort to protect himself once he knew my father had discovered financial irregularities. "We need to talk to Daniel," I said firmly. Directly, face to face. No lawyers, no intermediaries. Just the truth, whatever it is. An hour later, we arrived at Daniel Peterson's elegant home in Oak Ridge Heights, not far from our family's residence. The neighborhood exuded old money and established power, sprawling properties hidden behind mature trees, discreet security systems, and an unspoken agreement among residents to respect privacy above all else. Daniel's colonial-style mansion reflected his professional success, imposing without being ostentatious, traditional yet impeccably maintained. As we approached the front door, I wondered how much of this lifestyle had been funded by money siphoned from Taylor Construction over the years. The housekeeper who answered seemed surprised to see us but showed us into Daniel's study, where he was reviewing documents at an antique desk that probably cost more than most people's cars. The room was exactly what you'd expect from a successful attorney, leather-bound law books lining built-in shelves, credentials and awards tastefully displayed, a single oil painting of a sailing vessel that looked valuable but not flashy. His surprise at our unannounced visit quickly shifted to wariness when he registered our expressions. "Emma, Rebecca, this is unexpected. Is there a problem with the merger paperwork?" "We received an interesting communication from Jason," I said without preamble, "about your involvement in Dad's financial affairs." Daniel's face remained impressively neutral, though I noticed his hand tighten slightly on the pen he held. Jason is facing serious allegations. I wouldn't put much stock in anything he claims at this point. Even if those claims involve, "You embezzling from Taylor Construction for over a decade?" Rebecca asked, her tone sharper than mine. "Even if they suggest you were actively involved in altering my father's will, not just a reluctant participant." A flicker of something, fear perhaps, crossed Daniel's features before his professional mask reasserted itself. "These are serious accusations. If Jason is making them formally, I would need to consult my attorney before discussing the matter further." "This isn't a formal deposition, Daniel," I said, taking a seat across from him uninvited. "This is two daughters trying to understand what really happened to their father, what really happened to their inheritance, and what role their trusted family attorney played in both." Daniel set down his pen carefully, buying time as he considered his response. The calculated gesture reminded me suddenly of my father, who had employed the same tactic in difficult negotiations, a similarity that now seemed ominous rather than comforting. "Your father was an extraordinary man," Daniel began, his tone measured. "Brilliant in business, dedicated to his family. But he wasn't infallible. He made decisions, particularly in his later years, that weren't always in the best interest of Taylor Construction." "What kinds of decisions?" Rebecca prompted when he paused. "Refusing to diversify into emerging markets, maintaining operational models that had become outdated, rejecting acquisition opportunities that could have significantly expanded the company's footprint." Daniel spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. I advised him repeatedly to consider more progressive approaches, but William was traditional in his outlook. "So you decided to help yourself to company funds?" I asked bluntly. "To compensate for his failure to take your advice?" Daniel's expression hardened. That's not how it began. Initially, it was about creating off-book investments, opportunities William refused to pursue officially, but that showed tremendous promise. The funds were always intended to benefit Taylor Construction eventually. But they never did, Rebecca stated, her voice tight with controlled anger. Did they? He had the grace to look momentarily ashamed. The 2008 financial crisis complicated matters. Some investments failed. Others required additional capital to salvage. What started as an unauthorized investment strategy evolved into something more problematic. The clinical description of what was, essentially, years of systematic theft struck me as profoundly characteristic of Daniel, always couching unethical behavior in professional terminology, always finding justification for crossing lines that should have remained uncrossed. And Dad discovered this just before he died, I prompted. Daniel nodded slowly. He found discrepancies in some old accounts, called me, Jason, and Rebecca in to discuss them. He was angry, confused, feeling betrayed. By you, Rebecca clarified. His friend of 30 years. By all of us in different ways, Daniel corrected. He felt you had abandoned the family business, Emma. He was concerned about Jason's influence over Rebecca's financial decisions. And yes, he felt I had violated his trust. And then he had a heart attack, I said. Conveniently before he could take action against any of you. Daniel's gaze sharpened. There was nothing convenient about William's death. It was a tragedy, one triggered by stress and his pre-existing condition. And my accident? I asked, watching his face carefully. Another coincidence? Something shifted in Daniel's expression, surprise perhaps, that I would make this connection. I had nothing to do with your accident, Emma. That's an outrageous suggestion. I studied him, trying to determine if the denial was genuine. Daniel had been our family attorney my entire life, had attended my graduations, had advised me on my first property purchase. The idea that he could have arranged to have me killed seemed incomprehensible, and yet so did the revelation that he had been stealing from our family for years. Then who did? Rebecca demanded. Jason claims it wasn't him. You say it wasn't you. The brake lines didn't cut themselves. Daniel hesitated, and in that moment of indecision, I saw a calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing loyalty against self-preservation, past allegiances against present realities. Harold Winters, he said finally, your independent board member. The name hit me like a physical blow. Harold had been a business associate of my father's for decades, had served on the Taylor Construction Board for nearly 15 years. He was godfather to Rebecca's oldest child. The annual fishing trip he took with my father had been a fixed tradition every summer for as long as I could remember. That's impossible, Rebecca protested. Harold would never. Harold has been working with Blackwell Development for years, Daniel interrupted. Initially just sharing industry gossip, but eventually feeding them inside information about Taylor Construction's bids, strategic plans, financial position. When William discovered the financial discrepancies, Harold panicked, assuming his arrangement with Blackwell would be exposed during any forensic audit. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. So he arranged my accident, I concluded, to eliminate one of the people who might challenge Dad's leadership, who might push for that audit. Daniel nodded grimly. Jason learned about it afterward, through his contacts at Blackwell, used the knowledge to pressure Harold into supporting the fraudulent will, and later, the potential Blackwell acquisition. Rebecca and I exchanged glances, both processing this new information, another betrayal from someone our family had trusted implicitly. You can verify this? I asked. Check Harold's financial records, Daniel suggested, particularly payments from a shell company called Horizon Consulting, and his phone records from the days surrounding your accident. You'll find communications with a mechanic who has since left the country. The specificity of the information lent it credibility, though I remained wary of accepting anything. Daniel said at face value. He had proven himself adept at deception, at presenting partial truths that served his interests. "Why tell us this now?" Rebecca asked, echoing my unspoken question. "Why implicate Harold after staying silent all this time?" Daniel smiled thinly. "Because Harold has been working with the SEC for the past month, providing information about financial irregularities at Taylor Construction in exchange for immunity. Information that implicates me, Jason, and potentially even Rebecca. He's saving himself at everyone else's expense." The revelation explained Daniel's earlier comment about my accusations being outrageous, not because they were false, but because they were directed at the wrong person. His disclosure wasn't motivated by sudden moral clarity, but by self-preservation and revenge against a former co-conspirator who had betrayed him. "And the will?" I pressed. "Was that your idea, as Jason claimed?" Daniel sighed, seeming to deflate slightly as the weight of years of deception caught up with him. "Not initially. When your father collapsed, my first concern was genuinely his health. But when it became clear he might not recover, Jason raised the issue of succession planning, pointed out that with you in the hospital and Rebecca already established in the company, a simplified inheritance structure made practical sense." "Practical for whom?" I asked coldly. "For the company," Daniel insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "For continuity of leadership during a crisis. But yes, it was also convenient for those of us who needed to protect ourselves from scrutiny." "So you guided my father's hand to sign documents while he was heavily sedated," I said, the betrayal still raw despite everything else I had learned. "You arranged for witnesses who wouldn't question the circumstances. You deliberately excluded me from my rightful inheritance." Daniel didn't deny it. "I made choices I'm not proud of, Emma. We all did." "Some more than others," Rebecca interjected, her voice containing a hint of defensive anger. "I may have gone along with the plan, but I didn't orchestrate it. I didn't steal from the company for years. I didn't arrange to have my sister nearly killed." Daniel raised an eyebrow at her sudden attempt to distance herself from the conspiracy. "No, but you benefited from all of it, Rebecca. The falsified will, the financial fraud, even Emma's accident, all created circumstances that advanced your position. Your hands aren't as clean as you'd like to believe." The assessment was harsh, but not entirely unfair. Rebecca flinched visibly but didn't argue the point further. "So what happens now?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The web of deception, theft, and betrayal surrounding Taylor Construction was too extensive, too complex to resolve privately. Too many people had been complicit for too long. "Now we all face consequences," Daniel said simply. "Different ones. Perhaps depending on our level of involvement and willingness to cooperate with authorities, but consequences nonetheless." The statement held a note of fatalism that suggested Daniel had already accepted the inevitability of professional ruin, possible criminal charges, the destruction of the reputation he had built over decades. It was, in its way, almost a relief, an end to pretense, to the exhausting maintenance of elaborate lies. "I'll need some time to prepare," he added, glancing around his study as if seeing it, and perhaps his entire life, in a new light. "To speak with my personal attorney, to get my affairs in order, a few days at least." I recognized the request for what it was, not just practical preparation, but a plea for a head start before the full weight of legal scrutiny descended. It was perhaps the final privilege he was requesting as our longtime family attorney, advance notice of his impending downfall. 48 hours, I said after exchanging a glance with Rebecca. Then we go to the authorities with everything. We know. He nodded, accepting the terms with the same professional courtesy he might show when concluding a business negotiation. Thank you. And Emma. For what it's worth, I am truly sorry. For all of it. I didn't acknowledge the apology. Some betrayals run too deep for simple expressions of regret to hold any meaning. As Rebecca and I left Daniel's house, the weight of everything we had learned settled around us like a physical presence. Our family company, the legacy our grandfather and father had built, had been corroded from within by the very people entrusted with its protection. The inheritance I had fought to reclaim was tainted by decades of deception and criminal activity. What do we do now? Rebecca asked, as we stood in Daniel's driveway, her voice containing none of the confidence that had once been her defining characteristic. I took a deep breath, considering our options. We could attempt damage control, remove Daniel and Harold from their positions, implement stricter financial controls, hope that the full extent of the corruption never became public. It would be the pragmatic approach, minimizing immediate damage to Taylor Construction's reputation and value. Or we could do something more difficult, but ultimately more meaningful. Build something new on honest foundations, even if it meant tearing down much of what currently existed. We tell the truth, I said finally. All of it. To the authorities, to the board, to the employees. We cooperate fully with any investigation, make restitution where possible, and rebuild Taylor Construction from the ground up, ethically, transparently. Rebecca looked startled. That could mean criminal charges for multiple people, including potentially me. It would certainly mean public scandal, damaged contracts, lost value. Yes, I acknowledged, but it would also mean finally ending the cycle of deception that's been poisoning our family for years, creating the possibility of something authentic rising from the ashes. She was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications of such radical transparency. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite the emotion behind it. Dad would hate it, she said. The public embarrassment, the damage to the Taylor name. Maybe, I conceded. But Mom would understand. She always valued truth over appearances. Rebecca nodded slowly, the mention of our mother seeming to strengthen her resolve. Okay, we tell the truth. Together. The months that followed were as difficult as I had anticipated. The SEC investigation expanded to include Daniel, Harold, and several other executives who had knowledge of or participation in the financial irregularities. Criminal charges were filed in multiple jurisdictions. Taylor Construction's stock price plummeted initially as the extent of the financial malfeasance became public. Jason was eventually located in Milan and extradited to face charges related to embezzlement and conspiracy. He maintained his innocence regarding my accident, though evidence increasingly supported Daniel's claim about Harold's involvement. The mechanic was never found, having apparently used his payment to establish a new life in South America. Daniel Peterson pled guilty to multiple charges of financial fraud, avoiding a public trial but receiving a 10-year prison sentence that effectively ended his legal career. Harold Winters received reduced charges in exchange for his cooperation, but still faced significant civil penalties and professional disgrace. Rebecca and I testified in multiple proceedings, providing everything we knew about the company's operations, the fraudulent will, and the events surrounding our father's death. In recognition of our cooperation and Rebecca's limited direct involvement in the financial crimes, she was ultimately spared criminal charges, though the civil penalties were substantial. Throughout the crisis, we worked side by side to keep Taylor Construction functioning, reassuring clients, supporting employees, implementing new governance structures that would prevent similar abuses in the future. The merger with Uncle Liam's Chicago operation proceeded, providing needed stability during the turbulence. Most surprisingly, we discovered depths of resilience in each other that neither had fully appreciated before. Rebecca's skill with clients, proved invaluable as we fought to retain key accounts. My architectural expertise allowed us to diversify into new service areas when traditional construction contracts temporarily dried up. There were dark moments, certainly. Days when the legal and financial challenges seemed insurmountable, when public scrutiny became almost unbearable, when the loss of trusted relationships left us feeling isolated and vulnerable. During one particularly difficult week, after we lost 3 major contracts in rapid succession, Rebecca suggested that perhaps we should consider selling what remained of the company and walking away. We could start fresh, she argued, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Something completely separate from all this history, all these betrayals. I understood the temptation. The constant battle to salvage Taylor Construction was taking a toll on both of us, emotionally, physically, professionally. But something in me resisted the idea of surrender, of allowing the corruption we had exposed to claim a final victory. This company survived the Great Depression, I reminded her. It survived the 2008 financial crisis. It survived Dad's heart attack and my accident and Jason's betrayal. It can survive this too, if we don't give up on it. The next day, Rebecca arrived at the office with a newly developed client retention strategy and a determination that matched my own. We didn't discuss the moment of doubt again, but something shifted between us. A deepening of respect, perhaps, or a recognition of the stubborn resilience we shared despite our many differences. 1 year after Jason's damning video had revealed the final layer of deception, Rebecca and I stood together at the groundbreaking ceremony for Taylor Design Group's new headquarters, a sister company to the rebuilt Taylor Construction focused on innovative architectural solutions and sustainable development. The site was symbolic in multiple ways. Formerly abandoned industrial land now being reclaimed and revitalized. Located at the midpoint between downtown Oak Ridge and the Arts District where my apartment stood. Designed collaboratively by my architectural team and Rebecca's development experts. A physical manifestation of our joint vision for the future. As we symbolically turned the first shovelful of earth, photographers capturing the moment for the business press, I thought about how far we had come from that day in Daniel's office when I had learned of my disinheritance. The journey had been painful, the cost higher than I could have imagined, but the outcome was something neither Rebecca nor I could have achieved alone. The inheritance my sister had stolen from me had been recovered, though in a form very different from what our father had intended. The $3 million was largely gone, diminished by penalties, legal fees, and restitution payments. The family name had been tarnished by scandal before being gradually rehabilitated through honest effort and transparency. But something more valuable had emerged from the wreckage of betrayal and deception. A relationship between sisters based not on competition or resentment, but on hard-won trust and mutual respect. The lawyer's face when I showed him the real will had been just the first of many revelations on a journey that ultimately led not to the recovery of money, but to the reclaiming of something far more precious, the truth that had been buried beneath decades of family secrets. As we faced the gathered crowd to announce our vision for the new company, Rebecca caught my eye briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. We had survived the unimaginable together. Whatever came next, we would face it the same way. Not as rivals for a contested inheritance, but as partners in creating a legacy worthy of the name we shared. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.